What's up everyone, this is Jada Toys with another review. This time I'm doing a comparison between the Storm Ken with a bunch of other 6-inch figures, and I'll be comparing the articulation for the most part, but also talking a little bit about the price of this figure and the other figures as well. Real quick, a few things I want to say about this figure before I get into the comparisons. The figure's really good. It's a little light on accessories. A few minor complaints with the figure. I feel like the drop down hips are unnecessary, and also the way the torso looks without the top part of his gi on. And there was also a missing paint application on one of the hands. I think a lot of people got that with their figures as well. The stand that it comes with, I would have preferred if it didn't include a stand at all, because this stand really sucks. Pretty horrible contraption. Very unnecessary, too many parts. You get a plastic, clip the body in, and then you get a metal thing. Also doubles as a weapon. So I think the stand is a waste. They could have dropped the price down a few dollars maybe and not include the crappy stand. It does work, it's just very unnecessarily built. But anyways, the figure does have a few hands. We get an alternate head. Well, this is actually the alternate head here with the smirk. And this is the regular head with the neutral face. And then he has his Shoryuken effect, or whatever it's called, the fire Shoryuken. And yeah, the figure itself is very well made. Feels pretty high quality. There's a lot of rubbery parts, for example in the top area. The cap for the ball joint going into the torso is rubber, and that can lead to some ripping. And then also the upper torso is rubber. The gi is obviously rubber. The hands come off very easily. The hands are very soft, very squishy kind of rubber, and you can actually take the arm out, and you can also see the mechanisms inside for articulation. Maybe a little bit over-engineered, but that's just the way things are with Storm collectibles. And the gi comes off pretty easily. You just take off this front part right here, and then you have to take this out of the pin right there and then unpin it from the gi. So I'm taking it off to compare the articulation of the figure with some other figures, and also to show you how odd this abdomen looks. They have this cut here. They have a hinge that's on top of the ball joint, kind of unnecessary, and they removed that from the Sagat figure that's coming out next. So moving forward, they're not going to have that kind of articulation. It is very unnecessary, and maybe that'll make the figures a little bit more cheaper, and hopefully they get rid of the stand. They can bring the price down even more. So it's a very odd looking torso, and that's because so that the gi looks a little bit more natural sitting on the figure. So here's the Jada Toys, obviously going for a different style. I still like the slightly darker or tan skin tone, and taking his gi off is very similar, and that looks a lot better in my opinion. You can see the torso doesn't pinch in as much around the lower part of the abdomen. So right here, it's a lot more, it goes more straighter down into the waist, whereas here it pinches in a lot and it kind of tapers off right here on the side. So Jada Toys Ken looks a lot better there. Now in terms of movement, first I'll compare these two, and then I'll bring in some other figures to do some comparisons. So they have a similar neck setup, except it's constructed a lot differently. So with the Storm Ken, and it's pretty much, I'd say it's pretty much even, the amount of articulation. You can't really get a whole lot of looking up with the Jada Toys, but you can get a little bit more with the Storm, because the hair is really soft and it gets out of the way. And then of course they both tilt almost the same amount. I think the Storm has a little bit more because it has that rubber piece that's over the articulation. Moving on to the shoulders, it's a different setup. It's a different setup, I think, and with the butterfly joints, they really do pop out here from the back, and then again stretching that rubber piece that goes over the skeleton. It almost feels like they're cheating to get more articulation, because it's like, of course they're going to be able to get more range of movement from that, because it's just rubber and a weird looking skeleton underneath everything there. So of course they're going to get more range, but it's not really like a traditional action figure. For example, here it's all hard plastic. You know, I think a decent amount without sacrificing the sculpt of the figure or the materials of the figure. So I actually don't mind the Jada Toys for the amount of range it gets. This does get a lot more range. And then moving backward, you kind of run into the same problem where you can see inside the figure there. With the Jada Toys, you don't have that problem. You can also shift it up and down. You get a lot of range. You sacrifice the look of the figure. The bicep swivel, they're both pretty much the same, although the biceps on the Storm figure are very tight, and it makes an obnoxious sound. This one doesn't do it, which has me kind of worried. I hope it's not like broken or something, but this one does. Or I guess, yeah. So that is something you have to be careful of, but you don't have to worry about that with the Jada figure because it's not over-engineered. Just like a regular traditional figure, so you know what to expect. Then looking at the elbows, pretty much the same amount of range. It does look like, yeah, slightly more with the Jada Toys figure. Yeah, just like very slightly more range with the Jada Toys figure. And the hands on the Jada Toys are very simple. You just have a hinge and a peg going into the wrist, so you get a swivel and you get a hinge. With this, you also get a hinge and a peg, but it's like in the reverse order. So you get, and the hands are very soft, so you do get slightly more range out of that, but the hands also pop off very easily, like really, really easily. So that is kind of a trade-off there. Once again, I prefer the Jada Toys hand. It's just something that I'm more familiar with, and it's easier to work with, and it doesn't pop out as much. Moving on to the torso, the upper torso, you get that much range going back. Going forward, you get about that much, not a whole lot. And then you also get side to side movement and swivel. Now with this figure, again, it's sort of cheating because they just have the joints inside and they have a rubber piece thrown over it. So you can get more range moving forward and then more range going back as well. Just from that upper torso, I think the Jada Toys gets, the Storm has a little bit more range from that going forward as well. And now with the ball joint down here, ignoring the hinge for a second, you get that much going forward with the Jada, trying not to activate the hinge. That's how much you get with just the ball joint that's down there. So the Jada Toys gets a lot more range from that. And then going backwards, you also get a pretty good amount of range. And again, on the Storm, just using the ball joint, you get that much going back. Really close to being the same. Now with both of those joints combined, the hinge, and again, it's kind of like they're cheating. So with all the joints combined, you get that much forward, and you get that much forward from the Jada Toys. Again, you're getting a lot more from the Storm. The figure does look kind of disjointed from various angles, and also the way that the gi flexes once it's on there. Sometimes it just doesn't look the best, I think, but you do get more range. But I kind of prefer the look of the Jada Toys one, and you still get a pretty good amount of range out of the Jada Toys one too, out of the lower one. And the Jada Toys seems to get more, so that's, yeah, you can't really tilt it on that joint that much on the Storm figure, but you can get more from the Jada. Then we get down to the hips. So we have drop down on the Storm figure. Again, a little bit like cheating. On the Jada Toys, there is no drop down. So this is purely just a ball joint. And the legs can go that far up, which is really good. They just have this rubber piece for the hips, for the waist. And then without the drop down on the Storm, so trying not to activate the drop down, you get that much. Now with the drop down, you just get horizontal. So you can actually get more with the Jada Ken, which is really surprising, and it's because this part right here is not soft. It's like there's like a hard piece under it, but there's a soft piece over it. But the two parts, they're not helping each other. They're kind of fighting against each other. So there's not really a point to have this rubber part over it, because there's just a hard part underneath that gets in the way of the articulation. So, and the leg also does pop out sometimes. Pretty bad engineering, in my opinion. Jada Toys is a lot more better engineered. It's just more smartly put together. And they also got the swivel, thigh swivel, both pretty much the same. The Storm is a little bit tight though, and the knees, both of them are not that great looking in my opinion, but it is kind of hard to engineer knees to look decent with a character that has baggy pants like that. And also moving the leg backward, you can get a lot more on the Jada Toys, and then but you can get, like, seeing that leg keeps popping out, but you can get a pretty far amount too with the Storm figure. And there's 2 points of articulation on the ankle. There's a swivel going up into the bottom of the leg, so you can swivel it up there, and then you can also hinge and swivel it down here closer to the foot. And same thing with the Jada, swivel it up there under the pants, and then there's just a hinge going up, then you can swivel it on that, get rotation from the foot, and then also a toe hinge. The Storm figure does have a lot better ankle articulation, does help with getting in different poses, so the Storm figure wins on that one. So there's the gi back on the Jada Toys, and getting a lot of paint flaking from the belt there, which is pretty unfortunate. I didn't want to compare the articulation to some other figures. So here's a G.I. Joe classified figure. This is a quick kick. It also has a butterfly joint. Now the butterfly joints on the G.I. Joe figures are kind of hit or miss. This one is really bad. It barely moves. It's kind of just there, for looks. You have a hinge that goes that far, and the ball joint under that doesn't really move that much. That was crazy. So you can see right here, it looks like the Storm Ken is getting more range, but I think that's because his legs are shorter. But once you line up their waists, you can see that you pretty much get the same amount of range there. A lot of people are hyping up this figure and this line, and it's a good line, but it's not really that surprising. But it's like, we've seen this articulation before. The range isn't really that surprising. We've seen this range before, so people are kind of making a big deal out of nothing. You know, and they're talking about the price. These started out at like $25. Now they've gone up to $30. And it also has drop down legs, which are not very good. The G.I. Joe figure's not really good with the drop down hips, but you can get the leg that high. You do have to twist the thigh. Same thing with the Storm Ken. You got to move the thigh to get higher articulation, and even then, it looks like you get slightly steeper angle on the G.I. Joe figure. And here's another figure with drop down hips. This is a Bolivar's figure. Butterfly joint actually works on here, but of course not as much. You don't get as much range as a Storm figure, like we've talked about before. And then we do have two dumbbell joints going throughout the torso. Without the hinge, you get that much range. It's still more. Also have drop down hips on the Bolivar's figure, so you can kick very high. And then again, drop down hips. Looks like you get higher with the Bolivar's figure. So again, is this Storm figure really that impressive? Here's a Lightning Collection figure, and just want to compare the torso articulation. There's no drop down hips on this one. I'm just comparing the torso articulation here. And that's Storm Ken. All the torso articulation is activated there. More or less the same, really close to being the same. And here's a Marvel Legends. Drop down hips on this one as well. Yeah, the Marvel Legends figure's not very good with the drop down hips. With the torso, we do have a hinge and a ball joint at the top here. So again, very, very similar. And here's another Jada figure, and with the torso articulation, but without that hinge. The hinge is doing a lot of that work, I think. Without that hinge, it's pretty much the same. The Jada Toys actually gets a little bit more. No drop down hips on the Jada, drop down hips on the Ken, and pretty much get the same amount of range, maybe a little bit more on the Jada Toys. And last but not least, here it is next to the greatest figure of all time. This is the PW Toys Leon. So with the torso, okay, the torso articulation actually sucks, but you can like squish him pretty far. So now putting the gi back on, I'll kind of show you what I was referring to earlier. Butterfly joints, it still exposes a lot of the inner workings of the figure, and with the Jada Toys you don't get that. You know, the Storm figure is pretty good. Like, it's pretty sturdy figure. The Jada Toys Ken feels a lot more sturdier. Like, you can like bash this around and not worry about breaking something, although the paint is chipping off from the belt. But this figure, and the gi also hinders the articulation, I think, a little bit. That's probably why they threw that hinge in there. You're still getting more range out of the Storm collectibles, but it's like, of course you're going to get more range from that. Like, they pretty much make figures that are like, they have the skeleton inside, and they put rubber parts over that. Yeah, I don't know if that's really a traditional action figure. Like, the Jada Toys one is for sure a traditional action figure. The Storm, sort of getting into a different territory, I think. And if they keep adding more like rubber They keep putting more rubber parts and over-engineering the articulation and over-engineering the stands. Also, it's not a good look, but it's a good figure for whatever price it's going for now, like 30 bucks. The Sagat one is like 35, I think. So they're just going to be around that price point now. When they first came out, it was like, oh, they're 27 bucks. That's like, you get the best value for the figure. Jada Toys is still 25. I don't think their price is going to fluctuate as much. But with the Storm figures, you know, I think they're just going to keep going up, because right now they're at 30 on Big Bad Toy Store, and then same thing, the new Dan figure that just went up for pre-order. But in terms of articulation and engineering, it's over-engineered. The articulation is not very surprising. We've seen that range of motion before, and it's not very respectable or commendable, or maybe honorable, to say that the articulation is so good. The only reason it's good is because they over-engineer the skeleton, the internal skeleton of the figure, and just throw rubber parts over it. So that's my thoughts on the Storm Arena Ken and the Storm Arena line. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. That's it for this review, so we'll see you in the next one.